good afternoon, everyone. One more welcome. I'd like to welcome everyone to our Transplant Tuesday. Got a fun day set for you today. This is part of our 4-H Agronomy and Horticulture series. So we'd like to welcome you to this. My name is Brian McNeil. I'm a regional extension educator and I work with the 4-H Youth Development Program, and I'm one of the members of our 4-H Agronomy and Horticulture team. Here in 4-H, we empower youth with the skills to lead through a lifetime through research-based, fun, hands-on activities like science, health, agriculture, and civic engagement, all with the support of a caring adult mentor. Minnesota 4-H is brought to you by the University of Minnesota Extension, and today we're going to be learning about transplanting plants. We are recording the Zoom meeting today, and we'll be sharing this with others on our website after the presentation. I hope you've been joining us on some of our previous agronomy and horticulture Zoom experiences. Last week was Tractor Tuesday, and the week before was Manure Monday. And here we are at Transplant Tuesday. And this today is going to really connect into everything we've been learning up to this point. Before we get started, I do want to introduce a special guest we have on today, Lori Rugg. She's a University of Minnesota Extension Master Gardener, and she's going to be leading our hands-on session today. So Lori, maybe you just want to introduce and just say, how do you do?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to be here. Transplanting plants I love to do it. I love everything about plants. I've been a master gardener here in Steele County. I live in Owatonna for about 20 years now. So I spent the weekend outside gardening between the rain showers. We had a lot of rain over the weekend. So I did a lot of weeding and transplanting and potting up pots. So in between the rain showers, I did a lot of gardening over the weekend. So it was great. I loved it.
Well, again, thanks, Lori, for being with us. She did a fantastic job with us on Tasty Thursday, and we thought we'd have her back again. I think we're going to have her back in June. So hopefully she'll come back and keep saying yes to us because she's bringing us some great information and to our agronomy series. So thanks again, Lori, for being with us.
You bet.
Today, I want to remind everyone that your mics are muted. And that's just to kind of help with the background chatter, that type of thing. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We have agronomy team members, Amy, Kirsten, and Anya, who are watching the chat and will bring us those questions from time to time. So if you've got questions related to our topic today around transplanting plants, please just put those in the chat. We have one more thing to do before we get started. And like always, before our 4-H events, we like to do the 4-H pledge. And it really, the pledge is something that really unites us into the 4-H program. And so if you want to do that with me, I will advance our slide. So if you don't know our pledge, you can join with us virtually. And so we'll start out. I pledge my head to clear thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living. For my family, my club, my community, my country, and my world. And now, if you're new to joining us on this agronomy series or from another state, just a little fun fact, in Minnesota, we've added a portion to our pledge that's different than other states in the country, and that's we've added for my family in the pledge, and really that we pledge ourselves to our families and think about what we can do on our family together. And that's, I think, been a real important part of our pledge that was added probably back in the early 80s. And it's been a fun addition to have. And I know when we go to national conferences, Minnesota will proudly say for my family, and everybody turns to us and like, okay, you're saying something wrong here. But it's been a neat twist that 4-H has added to our pledge. And I've got one more reminder for all of us, and it's just a reminder as we participate on a technology experience like this or a Zoom meeting. And so we want to remember to have good manners, just like you would be in a face-to-face. So please make sure that you're putting nice things in the chat. We have, again, people, Amy, Kirsten, and Anya, who monitor that. And if someone gets a little disruptive and if they have to give some reminders, we can remove people too. So we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that you all participate and have a good time. So please be respectful in the chat. Now I'm going to stop sharing. And if you're not whilst in Zoom stuff at all, if you take your mouse and go to the upper right, you'll see there's a gallery view or a speaker view. And if you click speaker view, then Lori's going to appear all on our screen, and we can see exactly what she's doing with the different transplanting techniques. So I'll just encourage you to go up to your upper right and click speaker view, and you'll see Lori. And with that, Lori, I'll turn it over to you.
All righty. Well, I think better when I'm standing up, so I'm going to stand up. So I'm going to readjust my computer here. First of all, we're going to talk about transplanting seedlings. And for you, those of you that were with us when we did the little mini greenhouses in the liter bottle a few weeks ago, I planted mint in mine, and I have little mint seedlings. You see them in there? So I'm going to show you, these are pretty tiny little guys, and they're getting kind of big. So I'm going to move these out of the liter bottle and put them in a little container. And since they're quite little, I'm going to use a fairly small little pot. I think this is about a 3-inch size pot, and I've already filled it with soil. So the trick will be to get these tiny little guys out of here. So I'm thinking, how can I do that I don't damage the root system and keep them intact as much as possible? And I think what I'll do is probably take more than one, because mint plants are pretty aggressive, and this happens to be spearmint, and I'll probably just put it outside. So I'm going to use a plastic spoon. That's a great garden tool. If you don't have a plastic spoon, you can always use a spoon in your garden. So I'm just going to kind of gently loosen the soil and pop some of them out and see if I can go back in and scoop them out now. And it's working pretty good. So I've got my little transplants. And I've got as much soil as I probably can get in them. Just kind of take them over and put them in my pot. And just kind of nestle them down in there. They're not going to break, or you don't have to really worry about being not too gentle with them. They're survivors. So I'm just going to kind of push them on down into the soil then. And cover them up so they look like that in the soil. So I got some pretty good little sprouts here. And the reason why I'm putting it in this smaller pot is because when you're transplanting things, you don't want to put these little guys, say for instance, in a big 8-inch pot, because then what the plant thinks it's got to do is fill up that whole pot and that whole soil with roots, and you don't get much growth up on top. So you don't really want to use huge pots when you're transplanting things up to another size. The rule of thumb kind of is 1 inch to 2 inches larger in circumference whenever you're transplanting, be it a house plant or whatever you're transplanting. You just kind of want to judge what you're transplanting into that particular size of container. So these guys, I put 3 little guys in here, and I'm just going to put them back outside now. I think that'll be the best spot to have for them. So that's how you transplant little seedlings. I'm going to try the rest of these and kind of keep them in here for a while and see if I don't what happens. I thought when I planted this, I really hope I get some seeds growing, because I can't be an expert and not have my seeds germinate, but they did. They look really good, and I just kept it close to a window, and it took a while before they actually germinated, but now they've really started to take off. So we'll see what happens on down the road. So when you're transplanting seedlings, you don't be afraid of them, even though they're smaller and they're a little bit more tender. You can still go ahead and transplant them just as equally as well as anything else. So we got our little seedlings into a bigger size pot, and they'll be very happy. Do I have any questions about little seedling guys? Doesn't look like it.
We do have one in the chat, Lori, if
Okay.
you'd want to do the steps over again.
Oh, sure, you bet. I have my little greenhouse here where I have little seedlings in here growing from our little mini greenhouses that we did a few weeks ago. And I want to get them out with as less injury as possible. So I figured I will use one of my plastic spoons. And I'm just going in with the bottom part of the spoon first, and kind of go in there about as deep as I think their little roots are, and they're not very deep in there. So you don't have to dig down to the bottom or anything. I'm digging down to about right there. So it's about an inch or so down to kind of loosen the soil. And then I'm going to use my spoon part, just kind of go in there and pull it out. The other ones came out much easier. This guy's a little tougher. But I did get him out with some soil intact. Then I just kind of take him in my hand with as much soil around the root as possible. I got a really tiny little guy here. And then I just worked him into the pot, just kind of settled him down in and used my other finger just to kind of push him on down so that the bottom part of the plant is in the soil. That's really all you have to do. Just tuck them down in there. And they'll like to be in the bigger pot. So they should do just real fine. And the other thing you want to do is give them a little bit of water when you get them transplanted, because they'll kind of maybe go into a little bit of transplant shock, if you've ever heard that word. Plants don't like always to be upset and uprooted, just kind of like people. So you want to give it a little bit of water just to make sure that they make that transition very well. How's that? Okay,
Great.
so next let's talk about plants that you buy from the garden center. I happen to have got some little tomato plants here that I'm going to plant up in my garden. So when you get these little guys, they're little, I think. So sometimes depending on the time that I buy them, I might bump them up to a larger size pot, because these little cells dry out quite quickly. And I don't want to have to go outside and water my plants a lot every day and even remember to do that. So a lot of times when I get these home, I'll bump these up to a 4-inch size pot, just because they'll start to take off a little bit quicker and grow a little bit faster before you have that opportunity to put them in your garden. And tomatoes are one that really like warm weather. They like daytime average temperatures to be about 50 degrees, and the same way with nighttime temperatures. Night is probably almost more important than the daytime temperature. And also the soil temperature. Soil temperature needs to be above about 55 degrees in order for tomatoes to really take off. So I'm never really in a big hurry to plant my tomatoes in my garden, because they really like that warm weather. So that's why when I get them like this, I'm not in a hurry to go run right out and put them in my garden. So a lot of times, like I said, I bump them up to that 4-inch pot. So it's they're a little bit bigger when they go in the garden too. So I like to do that. And I've even been known to drive around with them in my car, especially if my car sits outside in the sun, because it creates a little hothouse, a little greenhouse. So if I really want them to start growing quicker, I kind of drive around with them in my car for a few days. And it's amazing what that extra heat does for your tomatoes. But anyway, so when you get these little guys, if they're really tightly packed in there, I use the old squishy method to kind of loosen them up to pull them right out of that little pack. And you see that it's pretty much all intact. So there's a lot of good roots in this tomato plant. And the other thing you want to remember when you get a tomato plant, wherever these little nodulars are, that's a root. So really by rights, you should snip off the bottom leaves. I'm just doing that with my finger. They pop off pretty easy. And even this little branch here should come right off. So you kind of end up with a plant that kind of looks sick, but it's really going to be more beneficial in the long run. So when you lay this tomato or dig this hole for your tomato in the garden, what you really want to do is kind of lay it like this. So you kind of lay it at a side. So wherever those little nodulars are that you took those leaves off, bury those down inside the soil, because that's going to form roots and it's going to make a much more sturdy plant in your garden. Because sometimes if you've ever seen a tomato when it gets kind of a real wimpy stem, you want to give it as much support as it possibly can, especially if you want lots of tomatoes. And this happens to be an early girl tomato variety, so it's going to come on a little bit quicker. So they're not going to break. You just kind of bend them gently and put the soil line right at about there. So you have just that's about all that's left sticking up out of the soil line. So that's another little tip about tomatoes. But I'm probably going to put this little guy in a 4-inch pot for now, because my garden's pretty wet and it hasn't been tilled yet, so I'm probably have to wait a few days till it dries out. So I'll just go ahead probably and bump them up so that they have that little extra boost to start growing, because tomatoes will like this kind of weather. So that's some little tips about tomato plants. Any questions about tomatoes or any kind of vegetable? I would do that with really kind of any vegetables. I plant basically tomatoes and green peppers in my garden, so both of those like warm weather. So I have not really just too nervous or anxious to get out there yet till it gets, that I know it's going to be warm weather.
So Lori, while they're putting their questions in the chat, if they have any, I've got a question for you. How did you come up with that of snipping the branches or the leaves off and planting it at an angle like that?
I guess I've been doing it long enough. I don't know where I first heard that tip way back when, but I keep repetitively hearing it. So it's like, okay, then it must really work. So I started doing that, especially if I get some. We have a Master Gardener plant sale typically every spring, not this year, but sometimes the tomatoes get a little long and leggy on you, and I don't like that because then you get the wimpy stem. So one of my gardening friends told me that along the way. So it's like, okay, I'm going to try that. And it really does make a difference. So one thing about the gardening world, you hear little tips and tricks from a lot of different people along the years. So it really does work. So that's a good one.
And I think that references the question in the chat too. So I might have had that same question other people were thinking.
Okay.
Why? So thanks for answering that.
All righty. So next we're going to talk about flowers, I guess, and that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So this year I got some flowers from a friend of mine. I didn't actually plant this, but this is a little zinnia transplant. And this is one of my Master Gardener friends, and she also goes ahead and makes her own little newspaper pots. Rather than buy peat pots, which we used in our little hydroponic garden, you could also make your own little pots out of newspaper. One of my friends said that an old telephone book page works really, really well. And if you use like an old cup or an old vase or something that's about, I would guess this is about 2.5 inches in circumference. So you don't want it to be very big. You want it to be fairly small for that seed when you first start it. So, and it's wet, it holds the moisture, so they don't dry out as quickly as some of the plastic cell packs. So this, as Master Gardeners, we like to use this kind of thing. We like to recycle and reuse. So we're doing kind of all kinds of good things. We're growing and we're recycling at the same time. And the other really good thing about this is you can just plant this just like this. You don't have to take the seedling out of this little pot. You plant the newspaper and everything right down inside the garden or a pot or wherever you're planting it. And for today, I'm going to put it in a pot. So we're going to pretend this is a big pot outside. So the first thing, I have a pot with drainage holes in the bottom, and that's kind of really important if you're putting anything into a pot. And these little zinnias, I'll probably just keep in this pot for the rest of the summer. So it's got to have drainage holes in it. Then I always put a little extra drainage in the bottoms of my pots. And I always have clay pots that are kind of get broken over the summer. So I just break them up further, and I'm going to put them right down into the bottom. So that'll provide just a little bit more drainage for you. And also the drainage holes in the bottom of the pot, sometimes soil will leak out, and I'm kind of a neat freak, so I don't like that extra dirt laying in my saucer. So another trick that I've learned over the years, I use a paper towel in the bottom of the pot. That way the soil won't leak out, but the water will still come out. The other thing that I've used are coffee filters. If you have coffee filters at home, coffee filters make a nice layer in the bottom of your pot too. So paper towels or coffee pot liners are great to use so your soil doesn't leak out and doesn't get all dirty, because I don't like a dirty sidewalk. But today I'm going to just put some broken pieces of clay pot in, and then you just add your soil. And so then I'm going to sink these down in so that just the top of the newspaper is right kind of at the soil line that I want. So that's all you really need to do. You don't have to remove it. You don't have to tear the newspaper away, because this will decompose in your soil as the plant grows. So that's all you have to do. These are really quite handy and very easy to use. So I would just kind of put 3 in this pot. If I have 3 of them, and you're good to go. So those are some kind of tips about container gardening. And you just want to, pack the soil in as you go. Keep that soil line of your transplant about at the same soil line that you would in your bigger pot, or whatever you're transplanting it into. Any questions about that? Everybody must know how to transplant. That's awesome. Because things like new soil, you can do a lot of times, even my house plants, I'll repot them with 1 inch to 2 inches around, like we talked about earlier, because once you're your house plants are in a pot for so long, all the good stuff comes out of the soil as you keep watering it and watering it. The other thing you can do with your summertime things is we didn't really talk about fertilizer either. A lot of times will use when I'm doing my container pots outside, I add a fertilizer called Osmocote, which is a slow release fertilizer that I don't have to keep refertilizing all year long or all summer because I'm kind of forgetful about that. Did I water it? Did I fertilize it? So if I put Osmocote down inside the soil as I'm transplanting it, then I don't really have to worry about subsequent fertilization through the rest of the summer. Because you water them a lot, especially if it's warm, and you take all the good stuff out of the soil. So you just want to make sure you have that little bit of boost in the arm with that fertilizer. And you can fertilize your garden as well. Just fertilizer is kind of a good thing.
Lori, there was a question here. Are there plants that don't transplant well?
I guess I've never really ran across a plant that I can't transplant very well. Some of them, like for instance, succulents have a very shallow root system. So you have to be a little bit more careful when you're doing those. I added some succulents to a garden that I have outside, and they don't really have a really deep root system. So you have to be careful, first of all, when you remove them from wherever they're at. And when you plant them, you don't want to plant them too deep also. And the same holds true for a variety of perennials outside. I'm a big perennial gardener. So for instance, peonies and iris can't be sunk down really deep into the soil or they're not going to bloom for you. So you kind of have to learn a little bit about what plant that you're using or transplanting or moving to make sure that you're doing the right thing for that plant. And that's where all the knowledge comes from. I mean, over the years, I've learned a lot about a lot of different kinds of plants. So everybody has their own little personality like people do. So you got to make sure that you do the right thing for the right plant.
We have another question. Do you have a way to explain how you make the newspaper pot?
Yep. You want to roll the newspaper up, because this is about 4 inches tall. I would have to say about 4 inches. And you just make a strip of your newspaper or whatever you're using, wet it a little bit, and just kind of wrap it into, like I've used a vase that was just a little small cylinder vase, and just kind of put it on the inside of your container so you get that round circle. And then you'll see that you have some on the bottom part. Then you just kind of fold those pieces in to make your bottom, and then keep it wet and then add your soil. So it's really fairly easy. It just takes a little bit of practice, but you want to end up making strips first about that size, about 4 inches in height, and probably I would say at least 1 foot long. So you have a nice strip that way, and just wrap it inside your container, whatever you're using, or however big you want to make those little pots.
Lori, is there a container soil that you would suggest for plants?
I kind of make my own. I buy potting soil. I don't buy garden soil. I don't buy topsoil because it's too heavy and it's too wet. So I usually buy potting soil. I also go to our local compost site and get a load of compost, and I kind of mix the two together, because sometimes potting soil is a little bit too light and too loose. So I like the fact that the compost brings a little bit of good soil texture to it, if you want to say, for lack of a better word, and it helps hold the moisture just a little bit. I've never really been real happy with the moisture control potting soil, although a lot of people use it. I just like to be in a little bit more control of my watering of my plants, so I don't really use that, and that's kind of personal preference. But I like to kind of make up my own little mix of potting soil and compost, and I just have a big bin that I mix it up. I add the Osmocote right in there sometimes too as I'm potting up if I'm doing a lot, so I don't really have to worry about remembering to do that either.
All right, I think unless I missed any other questions there, Amy, Anya, or Kirsten, I think that was all of our questions.
Oh, good.
There was a question about drainage. Do you have to have drainage in your pots?
Yes, because what if we would get a 4-inch rainfall and your pot's outside? What do you think would happen? That 4 inches of water would sit in your pot and your plants would eventually rot before it dried out. So yes, it's really kind of important to have drainage. Or if you see we're gonna have a big storm, move your pots inside. But I don't think people really want to go do that all summer long, move your pots in and out. So yeah, drainage is kind of important. If your container doesn't have drainage holes in it, the other couple things that you can do to help help that situation is put pea gravel in the bottom, or use some crushed up pop cans, just something so that if what happened to overwater it, the water's going to sit in the pea gravel or the pop cans, and it's not going to sit right directly on top of the soil line. So if you have a big enough container, you can just fill it with pea gravel or gravel of some kind so that those roots and that soil is up off the bottom of your container.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions.
Good.
Any other questions coming through unless anybody else sees any?
Well, I hope you all learned something a little bit. Don't be afraid to transplant. Don't be afraid to get in there with your hands and get dirty. Plants aren't gonna, they love you when you take care of them. So just give them a little love and they'll reward you with lots of tomatoes and all kinds of good stuff all summer long.
Great, thank you again, Lori. This is great tips. I'm ready to go out and do some transplanting now, so thank you for sharing. I do want to remind people once they, before you start jumping off, of our topic next week. So we have Fair Exhibit Friday is our topic next Friday, which is June, which is crazy. Next week is June already. So we would like to welcome you to join Fair Exhibit Friday, June 5th at 2 o'clock to learn about how to do some of the various things we've been doing the last 9 weeks with agronomy, how to share your learnings with a fair judge. So make sure that you make plans to attend our Fair Exhibit Friday on June 5th.